I'm Vivian Thomson, host of The Meaning of Green, the independent, unsponsored podcast about solving environmental problems. I'm a retired University of Virginia professor of environmental policy. I launched The Meaning of Green in 2019, and since then, listeners have come from over 60 countries and almost every U.S. state. My podcast is about issues like wildlife conservation in Kenya or the Sierra Nevada mountains in California, climate change, trash, air pollution, COVID, renewable energy, acid rain, water, the Panama Canal, and forests in places like Ukraine or Brazil, just to take a few examples. But this video focuses on a problem that hit very close to home, an underground oil storage tank behind our home in Silver Spring, Maryland. I'll show you what we discovered when we hired, at our own expense, a state-licensed contractor to unearth our tank, see if it was leaking, and close it off properly. So first, the contractors dug and dug. The previous owners said they were told there was no buried tank, but after we bought the house, I noticed a couple of telltale signs: closed-off pipes in the basement and a vent pipe outside the basement. Because I had had to close off a leaking underground storage tank at my previous home in Charlottesville, Virginia, I was pretty familiar with the hazards these tanks can pose. In Maryland, a home seller must disclose to the buyer if they have any knowledge of a buried tank. What's more, when you stop using a buried oil tank in Maryland, you must close it off properly within 6 months. At some point, we think probably when the home was sold in 2001, the tank's existence was obscured. The owner of the house, who converted from oil to natural gas in the late 1990s, certainly did not close off the tank properly. Finally, the contractors reached the top of the tank. You can see sticking up there to the left the former fill pipe for the tank. That's where the oil would have been put in. Someone decided at some point to cut off the fill pipe several inches below the surface of the soil. The fill pipe was full of dirt, no surprise there. The contractors noticed a hole in the top of the tank. Such tanks are notorious for rusting and developing leaks, so to this point, we feared the worst. Then they brought over a hose for sucking out the contents of the tank, and they started to wash out the tank. Any materials removed from the tank would be taken to a hazardous waste site for proper handling and disposal. Note all of the safety equipment the men are wearing. This is definitely not something you should try on your own. In Maryland, you must undertake this work with a state-licensed contractor. What came out of the tank was a sludge of dirt, oil, and water. After the tank had been cleaned out, the crew drilled a hole in the bottom of the tank so they could take soil samples and test the soil for contamination. The crew would do so with a device called a PID monitor, a photoionization detector that picks up volatile organic compounds. We held our breaths. What would the PID monitor show? It showed no contamination. The samples were clean. The samples will still be sent to a lab for confirmation, but at this point the crew is able to abandon the tank in place. That means filling it with pea gravel, covering it over, and removing the vent pipe. The whole operation took about 4 hours, start to finish. I'm posting this video for 2 reasons. First, you should figure out if you have a buried, unused oil tank on your property. If you do, you should get it taken care of by someone who is licensed to do so. Sometimes home insurance companies make you do that anyway, but you don't want a leak to happen. Second, I hope you'll consider listening to The Meaning of Green. The podcast is available on all the usual platforms, and the podcast website is at meaningofgreen.com. Season 4 is well underway, and the next episode will be about the Brazilian Amazon forest.